Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blind Spots. My name is Gayle MacDonald, and I am so happy to be here today with Dr. Lisa Riegel. And it was a very unusual way that we connected. And this confirms for me always the power of networking. And when we have areas of interest that we're highly engaged in, somehow at some point, someone will come into your life and want to share that information with you. You may remember a couple of weeks ago, I had Dr. Joel Rothheiser on as a guest, and I'm so grateful that Dr. Riegel reached out on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, that was interesting, and I would love to share my experience with you." And I couldn't be more excited because this is something I've been very, very passionate about for a very long time. So Dr. Lisa Riegel is here today, and she is going to support us in understanding how perceptions shape our behavior, and that our perceptions start in our mind. And in our pre-show conversation, Dr. Riegel had mentioned that it is all in the brain. It starts all in the brain. And I am so anxious, Lisa, to hear so much more about what you have to say about such an interesting topic, particularly in the way that it relates to leadership. So I would
Sure.
love to welcome you to Blind Spots. And I'd love to, as the audience would as well, hear a little bit about you before you do this real dive into this very interesting topic for us today. So welcome.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I've had a really strange and crooked career path. When I was right out of college, I uh, was selling automatic greasing systems for semis and off-road construction equipment, which was very strange because I was a suburban girl, never been on a farm.
Mhm.
And I did that for a couple years. I was successful doing what I was supposed to do. And then I just realized I really hate this. And I don't care if anybody buys grease. And it kind of started me on what I call my quarter life crisis, where I just realized like I'm on the wrong path. Like this is not my path to happiness. And so I quit my job. I was supposed to get married, called my wedding off, and I went on a walkabout. And I walked around for a couple weeks with a backpack and just tried to figure out what do I do to make myself happy. And then that led me to become a teacher. I wanted to work with kids. So I did that for 9 years. And then I was an administrator for a couple years at a career center. And then I had the opportunity to do my fellowship at Ohio State for my doctoral work. And I'd had some good leaders and some bad leaders, and I was very interested in why that is. How hard is it to be a leader? What makes a good leader? And so my doctoral work really focused on the human side of leadership. We learn a lot of like organizational theory and policy development and that kind of piece in our leader preparation, but we don't really learn how do we engage people and how do we get people in the system to feel happy and fulfilled and supported. So that was my doctoral work, and it was mostly around social science, motivation theory, hope theory, engagement things. And then I started to think, well, real change starts in the brain, the actual brain, the biology of our life. So I dipped into the neuroscience and really kind of went on a deep dive there. And what I really teach when I'm working with leaders or with individuals is that all of our behavior, whether it's academic behavior or social behavior or work behavior, it's the intersection of our biology and our context. And so if we understand the biology of our brain, then we can have more self-awareness. We'll have better ability to regulate ourselves so that we don't let stress run our lives. And ultimately, we end up with more self-control. And if you have control, you don't have as much unknown, and anxiety is really the product of not knowing. And so it makes you happier and healthier and more successful when you understand how your brain works. And we're not taught that. And then the other side of the equation is really that context. And we have ultimate control of our context. We can decide where we want to be and who we want to be with, and how we can create a positive context that feeds our soul versus depleting it. So that's kind of been what drives me. And then I work in schools, I work with leaders, I work in the private sector, I do a little bit of life coaching, I do keynotes for people. I take about 5 or 6 organizational clients a year and really go deep dive to work with the culture to try to build that context that makes sense. And also thinking about conflict resolution through the lens of biology, like what's going on in the brain and how do we address conflict by understanding that the problem we think we're facing isn't actually the problem. And so understanding that brain and the biology of behavior helps us to reframe those problems. And when we understand them and reframe them through a biological lens, our solutions change and become more aligned and successful.
Hmm. Wow. I understood all that you said, and I'm very proud of myself for that. Um, but there is one thing that I'm curious about. When you said, what we're stressed out about or what is troubling us is really not what's troubling us.
Yes.
So how does one even begin to look in all the closets of our brain and find out what it really is that is troubling us? We hear so much about triggers. Oh, this happened to you when you were a kid, and maybe that's why. And it can be very confusing. And my preference is to live in the here and the now and figure out how I can move forward and change things. But if we don't know what we don't know, if we have a plug for the show, blind spot
Yep.
about something, then what can be done?
Yeah, and that's where I think understanding your biology becomes so critical. So the first thing I would say is understanding how we perceive our environment. So, you have reality and then you have perception. So you and I could go to the same event and have a wildly different experience. And that has to do with some structures in our brain. So the thalamus of our brain. So I like to think of the brain as like a giant corporation. So your CEO lives in your prefrontal cortex in the thinking part. And then below your nose is your limbic system. And 80% of the traffic in our brain is below our nose. It's unconscious. So there is a lot of unconscious thinking that's going on that impacts the part that we consciously understand. And so the different departments in the brain that are involved in kind of taking in our environment and determining our response. The first one is the thalamus, and it's kind of like our data manager. So it's responsible for taking in all the sensory cues, what we see, hear, smell, touch, feel. And then it writes up a report. And in order to inform that report, it goes into our sensory memories. And those sensory memories are stored in the amygdala, and they are not time bound and they're not stories. They're just sensory associations, which is why, like, if you're selling your house, your realtor will tell you to burn a candle that smells like cookies
Hmm.
because people will walk into the house and that sensory association, as their thalamus is taking in all of the environment, will say, this is comforting, this is home, I could live here. Where if it, smells like sewage, you're not going to have that same response.
Hmm.
So the thalamus, when it goes into those sensory memories, they're almost like filters. So I always use the example of like a strainer, like a pasta strainer or a colander. If you have a banana, which represents reality, and you shove it through a strainer, it doesn't look like a banana anymore. It's still a banana, but it doesn't look like a banana. And that's kind of how the perceptions work, is you have the sensory environment that you're taking in that's just objective data. It's bright, it's windy, it's cold, whatever it is. But it goes through filters, and those filters add the emotion piece to it. They add the kind of subjective piece. And so if I have a filter in my brain that says the world is dangerous and scary and people generally are mean, then everything I experience in my life is going to go through that filter. And then that becomes my perception of reality. And for some of us, understanding our filters can help us understand why we're viewing things certain ways, and to make sure that our CEO is weighing in on, is that accurate or not. When we don't have any self-awareness, all of a sudden we can look at an event and it doesn't look anything like reality. So for example, say there were identical twins, they have an identical day. And at the end of the day, I ask one that has positive filters in their brain, positive, the information's passing through positive, perspectives. I'd say, "How was your day?" And oh, it was a little rough. I started out, I was running late, and then I spilled coffee all over myself. But this really nice person helped me pick it up, and my friend lent me a shirt because I spilled all over myself. And my colleagues were really nice when I got to the meeting because I was running late, and it was a crazy day, but it turned out fine.
Hmm.
Same exact experience with a negative, if the, identical twin, everything else is the same, negative biases in those filters. It'd be like, It was horrible. I started my day, I was running late, I spilled coffee all over myself, I was late to a meeting, I never got back on track. It was a horrible day. So, same exact event, completely different interpretation based on those filters that we have. And some of those filters we understand and some of them we don't. So for example, I grew up in a divorced home. My dad, on dad visit days or whatever, sometimes he would show up, sometimes he wouldn't, sometimes he was a couple hours late. So I spent a lot of time in my childhood sitting on the front stoop waiting for him. So my brain in that sensory association, it was, the reality of he's late, but then you add that subjective emotional piece to it. And I equated time and worth or time and love. And so I have huge anxiety around time. Like I'm never late. I am always early. And I know that that's where that comes from. But my body, if somebody's late, or if I'm running late, I get stressed. I deregulate in my body, or dysregulate in my body, even though I know cognitively I'm running late. It happens. It's no big deal, right?
Mhm.
So these filters in our brain lead us to have a physical reaction to the environment we're in because our brain's job is always to keep us alive and keep us safe. So if we have messages coming in and the thalamus is saying, "Hey, this is danger," then the thalamus sends that information to our security monitor, which is our amygdala. And that security monitor makes a couple decisions. The first decision is, do I hit the panic button or do I remain calm? And it can decide to either tap it or it can decide to wail on it. If it wails on it, then it says to the CEO of our brain, "Hey, we're in danger, so you go get a cup of coffee. We don't need you. The rest of your brain is going to go into survival mode and make sure you survive." If it just taps it, it'll send a message up there and say, "Hey, we've got some conflicting associations here. We're not sure if this is dangerous or not in, the brain's view of dangerous. So you might want to weigh in." So the goal is if we understand the filters in our brain, then we're still going to probably have that amygdala hit the panic button, but he could just tap it and we still stay in control. When we're not in control, that's like if you have an argument with somebody and then once you calm down, you're like, "Why did I say that? That's not even who I am. That I don't mean that. I shouldn't have said it." It's because the you part of you didn't say it. Because this part of your brain where your morals and your character and your personality live was out at Panera having a coffee. It was the limbic system
Right.
of your brain that was taking
Right.
over. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, the first step in understanding. And like there was a woman in Cleveland who was having panic attacks going to a gas station. She could not figure out why, but she realized that it was a pattern that she was having all this anxiety around getting gas. Well, what she realized is when she was a child, she had been abused by her grandfather, who was a mechanic. Her room was right next to his garage. So that was terror, right, as a child. So that smell of gas was dysregulating her. And it was getting to the point where she was having panic attacks. So understanding how that works in your brain and the filters, she was able to be proactive and say, "Hey, brain, I'm about to go get gas. This is not that. We're safe. We're fine." And so she was able to send messages down to that thalamus, to the IT department, and say, "Hey, don't write in the report we're in danger because we're not. You're going to smell something, but it's going to be just fine." So she still hates getting gas, but she was able to do the self talk. And again, 80% of the traffic is below your nose and unconscious, and only 20% comes from the top. So if you're self aware, you can increase the percentage of traffic where you are controlling how the rest of your brain is working. And just like with the company analogy, like you have a CEO office, an IT, an HR department, a fulfillment department, whatever. The job of the CEO is not to do the jobs of everybody in every department. It's to oversee those departments and to train them up so they're efficient and effective. So when you think about your limbic brain, the job of the CEO is to recognize if you have faulty filters or if you have an out of control stress regulation system and to fix that by sending the messages down. But we can't do that until we understand how those messages actually come to be to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yes. I am proud to say, yes, it does. And the reason is because I have been striving to understand this for a very long time and reading materials that support the a similar type of research that you've been doing. And I do have a couple of questions, if I may ask them at this point.
Of course.
And it's something that clients will ask from time to time because we do have conversations about the thoughts that, like their statement is, I get these thoughts in my mind and I want to learn how to stop them. Now, as a life coach, and you said you do some life coaching, so I'm very aware that as per conversations with Dr. Joel as well, that there's that line. I mean, I'm not a therapist. I wouldn't want to do any
Right.
type of therapeutic work with them because I'm not qualified. But it's pretty simplistic to just talk about, oh my gosh, I've got this thought. As in you see someone on the street and they might remind you of someone else that you didn't have a good relationship, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden you feel anxious, but you don't know why.
Yep.
Same as the smelling the gas situation.
Yep.
And when I hear clients tell me that they have these thoughts and they feel bad about having those thoughts and they don't want to have those thoughts, is it likely that we can stop those thoughts? I kind of don't think we can. But I'd like your weigh in on this because it's so critical to know that just because you might have that thought, you're not a
Right.
bad person. It's just the
Right.
CEO going, okay, this is what's happening. Let's have a look here.
Right. So one of the things I always say is the solution to pollution is dilution, right?
Wow.
So, so if you have a lot of negative associations in your
Mm-hmm.
thalamus and
Mm-hmm.
that's causing you to have thoughts about people or about situations, or maybe you're in a crowd and somebody says something and you just can't let it go and you're just spiraling negatively, right?
Right.
So, how do you dilute that? Because you want to get to the point where your brain isn't hitting that panic button where it's just tapping it saying, "Hey, this could go either way." So you can never remove the experiences that you've had in your past and the
Right.
associations your brain's made,
Mm-hmm.
but you can make new ones that are
Mm-hmm.
positive. So this is where, you know, having positivity every day. So one of the things I used to do with my kids are 20 and 23 now.
Mm-hmm.
But every day when they came home from school, I would say, tell me two good things that happened. And it was really sad to me that they could not do that in the beginning because their brain wasn't noticing it. It's like the lady with the coffee. She didn't notice in her story that a nice person picked her up and helped her wipe herself off and somebody else lent her a shirt. Her story only
Yeah.
recalls the trauma of the day, of the things that didn't go well. So starting to be intentional about gratitude and positivity. And it kind of goes back to, remember Saturday Night Live, Stuart Smalley? He's like, gosh darn it, I like myself. And he would do affirmations in the mirror and all of that kind of stuff. Those things actually have a biological basis
Mm-hmm.
because if you are saying, I am strong, I am capable, I can do whatever I set my mind to. If you're saying that all the time, essentially what you're doing is having the CEO send that down to the thalamus and say, hey, put that in the file, run this through that file, and make sure that you're using this as the filter. And so having people think about, I always talk about you have to figure out the underlying fear, right? So for me, I get nervous when I'm late, but that's not really the fear. It's not about late. It's about belonging and love and relationship. That fear is coming from a disconnect of that and because of my life experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
getting at that root cause. So for example, and I talk about, I have a book coming out for leaders and I talk about how like leaders spend a lot of time dealing with conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at a conflict, so for example, say, Sally says, Joe's always mean to me and doesn't appreciate my work and doesn't think I work hard enough and blah, blah, blah. What's the real problem here? The real problem is not probably about her work. It's she's interpreting his actions that she's not good enough. And so maybe, who knows, maybe in her past she had like super high expectation parents, or she has always been a perfectionist, or she's, for whatever reason, she's filtering his actions of maybe he's just giving her some constructive feedback and he thinks he's being helpful and she sees it as you're attacking my expertise, right? So getting first to what is that fear and then giving people positive self-talk to help them understand that fear and to overcome that by putting positivity into those perception folders as opposed to just feeling like, why am I feeling like this? I'm out of control. I'm mad.
hmm hmm Which is the biggest barrier that our minds then create. I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm upset, and then there is no room for yes, and what else? How could
Right.
you, the thought process, to me, and I just have experienced this in my own life, is that when I have felt that way, there is no room for solution. There's only room for the anger and all of the other, and
Right.
then we start to go down that rabbit hole of, well, I knew I wasn't good enough. Why did I even bother trying? I
Right.
knew that person didn't like
There's your
me.
fear right there. I knew
Right.
so it's a fear of not being enough, right?
Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
the positive talk is you find places where you have satisfied people and
hmm
you reflect on those and you think
Yeah.
about them and you thank them for their appreciation of the work you've done and you focus on those positives
hmm
so that you start to have experiences that dilute that negative, that pollution in
Yeah.
your filters.
hmm
And the other thing too is if you start to let the anger take over, you've basically let your limbic system hijack your body. You get
hmm
in a fight, you say something, you calm down, you're like, why did I say that? This isn't
Yeah.
me. That's because you weren't home. And so,
Hmm.
as we think about being able to critically think, I read something somewhere the other day that said the adult population in the United States, only about a quarter of the people are adequate at critical thinking. And that's kind of scary. But critical thinking happens up here. And if
hmm
we are living in a hamster wheel of the stress response, biologically, it shuts down this part of our brain and we are
hmm
running on the limbic system. And the
Yeah.
problem too with that is that you make your problems worse because the stress response is an inflammatory process. And so when you think of people who have arthritis or lupus or autoimmune diseases, or, I've had a couple back surgeries. So when I find myself stressed, my back hurts more than it normally does because it's an inflammatory process and we can actually cause disease through stress. So when I say people will be happier, healthier, and more successful, that healthier is true. Like it's actually physically healthier if you can start to understand your brain and start to be more intentional about I'm the boss of this brain. I get to choose how this organization runs rather than the organization's running wild and I just am like constantly trying to catch up.
Oh my goodness. I just appreciate every word you're saying. I am hanging on every word. I will watch this particular episode over and over again. And if I was to really let loose right now, I'd go, yes, yes. And a little bit off topic, but as you were thinking about or as you were talking about where the critical thinking piece is, like above the nose, I
Mm-hmm.
thought of, and this is how I think you'll appreciate it as a person who does research on the brain. My brain went to, well, I'm going to be like Post Malone and I'm going to get a tattoo right on my forehead that says critical thinking starts here.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't care what I have to do to remind myself that I am not my thoughts, especially the ones
Right.
that get me on, like you say, the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
I can be anything. I can choose to think whatever I want.
And I think when you think of your brain as a corporation versus just
hmm
my brain is me and I own every
Yeah.
thought, some
Yeah.
of the thoughts that are going through your brain are not you. They're coming from down here and they're coming
Yeah.
from a primitive part of your brain that is truly designed to keep you safe and keep you
hmm
alive. And
hmm
so it is always going to come at it through a fear base because if
hmm
it's not looking for the danger, it's not doing its job. And so
Yeah.
I think understanding that your CEO is where you live. That's where you are. The rest of this is taking care of fear and it's using past experiences to say, hey, that hurt in the past. So that's one of
hmm
our fears and
hmm
putting it into that. Where if you can start to feel like you have a thought you don't like, or you have a thought that you can't get rid of, or you're out of control emotionally and you're just feeling like, why am I so angry or so sad or so anxious? You
hmm
can start to say, hey, I'm not. This part of my brain down here is
mm
telling me to do that, and I'm going to say no. I have the choice to say no, and I am the
hmm
CEO of this company. So I get to tell the departments how to operate, not the other way around. So it
hmm
gives you kind of an empowerment. And it also, I think, can get rid of some of the shame. that people feel. When you're out of
Mm.
control, you can feel a lot of shame and guilt that is not helpful for anybody. And the
Right.
reality is it's not a matter of you should feel guilty. It's a matter of you should feel energized to say, "Hey, I need to be a better leader. I need to be a better
Hmm.
leader in here and
Hmm.
fix the rest of the systems in my head so that they're
Hmm.
doing work for me instead of the
Hmm.
other way around."
Hmm. Hmm. And that to me connects to what you said earlier about the physical impact that
Yeah,
not, getting a grip on these
yeah,
thoughts will have on us
right.
over the years. And that
Yeah,
takes me into that very deep topic of, possibly some of the conditions that we're experiencing now,
hmm,
in the 21st century, have they stem from how our parents were raised and how their parents were raised, and that, how my parents raised me, and on and on. And
right.
I just really do often wonder. And again, I've always got my earbuds in listening to a book on something to do with the whole neuro effect on
Yeah,
how we behave. And a couple of facts that I've taken from, like, overall with these books is that this has been happening for a very long time.
yeah,
And is it just a cruel joke of nature
yeah,
that we are almost unconsciously programmed to default to the negative?
right,
And then
right,
we have to do, that 180 and turn it around and go, wait a minute. I think there's something else at play here.
right. Well,
And
and I
what
think
is
that's
that?
what, yeah, and that's what makes humans so unique is that
Mm-hmm.
the animal kingdom, they are programmed to look for the fear because that's how they survive. If they're
Yeah.
not paying attention, then they get
Yeah.
eaten. So we are
Yeah.
programmed to look that way, but other animals don't have this joyful part up here. They don't have
Right.
a fully formed prefrontal cortex, and that's what makes
Mm-hmm.
us human. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have to fight those evolutionary impulses. And, they've done studies. There's a field of science called epigenetics. I don't know if you've heard of it before,
I
but
have, but I'm not familiar with what it is, but I've heard the term.
yeah, I know enough to explain, to describe it, not explain it in deep terms, but
Yeah.
basically, epigenetic scientists are studying how genes travel over generations and how nature and nurture, so like the nurture, our environment, can actually switch on and off genes. And then we pass those down to our children, our offspring, and they trace them through multiple generations to kind of what you were talking about your parents. So they did a study called the Dutch Winter Hunger Project, and they followed, there was a time when there was some starvation going on, and they followed the women who were pregnant at the time of the famine, and they followed those babies, and there were biologic changes in the way that those babies' bodies metabolize food that pass down to multiple generations. And so when you look at trauma, and you can even look, there's some folks that are studying African American population and
Oh,
that came, that are
yeah.
from like enslaved, and the trauma over generations and how that has changed and impacted different gene sequences being turned on and off, which is another reason why sometimes we have certain races or people who would have lived in similar conditions
Hmm.
that tend to have higher blood pressure problems or more cancer problems or things. So it is very interesting that, biologically, this, our experiences impact not just our mind but our body. And I always laugh, like, why is it that our dental insurance and eye insurance isn't covered in our, they're literally in our body, but we need to buy separate insurance for our teeth and eyes.
Hmm.
And I feel like we do the same thing with the mind, the body, and the brain. If you go to a doctor and you say, I'm sad, they say you have depression and they put you on medicine. But maybe you're sad because you have hypoglycemia, and that can cause all kinds of mood shifts. Or, if you go in and you say, I feel anxious when I'm in crowds, they say you have social anxiety. If you went to the doctor and said, I have heartburn, they wouldn't diagnose you with heartburn. It's a symptom. And they would dig into why is that happening. And I think one of the things that we have going on in today's world that is very damaging for those filters in our brain is that we have a sick mindset. And I meet people and it's amazing to me how quickly they tell me all their diseases. Like, oh, I have this and I have depression and I'm this and I'm that. And I'm like, when you present yourself that way, when you decide up here that that's who you are as part of your identity, then all that information is going to be filtered through the lens of you are a sick person, as opposed to you are a well person who maybe has some times where you have to manage anxiety. So it's a mind shift in that. The National Institute of Health came out with statistics. Social anxiety is misdiagnosed at 98.7%. So just think about that for a minute. And how many people are now labeling themselves as having anxiety as a disorder as opposed to just a challenge? And in some cases, being medicated when they don't need to be medicated. In some cases, not actually getting to the underlying root physical cause. And I talk about this in my book, Neuro. Well, there are a lot of different physical causes. And even you think about in the workplace, there's I forget what the actual percentage was, but it's something like 30% of the public has metabolic issues as far as sugar issues and how we metabolize, and they don't know. So if you're a boss at a workplace and you have somebody who's all over the map, up and down, emotional, sometimes tired, sometimes, and you're saying they have a mental issue or they have bipolar or they are just difficult to work with or they're whatever, it could be a physical issue going on. And so I think part of it is knowing your brain and then understanding the mind impacts the brain impacts the mind impacts the body impacts the brain. It's all a connected system and should be looked at it that way if we're really trying to understand who we are and why we feel and behave certain ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, might be hard to believe, but some of what you have just said, I just listened to in a book. It's by Dr. Gabor Mate, and he speaks of the same thing and how all of that impacts each other and how there are not necessarily misdiagnoses all the time, but it's like what else can the doctor look at?
Right,
And I mean, if you think of someone with diabetes and their blood sugar drops like instantly, you're going to get a huge change in behavior.
right.
And I was familiar with that even as a small child because my mom got diabetes when I was 6, and it was evident, like I could just tell.
Yeah. Well,
And
and the other piece
yeah,
too is when you add stress. So
oh yeah,
when your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, it
mm-hmm,
releases sugar from your
mm-hmm,
muscles and releases adrenaline and cortisol. So adrenaline
yeah,
and cortisol are inflammatory.
yeah,
Releasing sugar from your muscles is going to make it really hard to regulate your sugar. So
yeah,
there's a story of a young girl. She was not regulating her sugar well, and again, they weren't looking at her mind and body all connected. So they called in a psych consult and said, we think she's lying and sneaking candy. And so the psychiatrist was sitting with her, and this is Bruce Perry's work. If you've ever heard of him, he's amazing. He has a book called The Body Keeps the Score that's fascinating.
yeah, yeah,
But he was talking about, so this little girl, when the ambulance came in, because her room was near the ER, when the
mm-hmm,
ambulance came in, he could see her kind of tense up. So he said, well, what happened to you? And she explained that her friend had been shot in the park. And so that sound of the ambulance and being in a hospital was dysregulating her body. Well, her body kept
okay,
sending out cortisol and sugar, and so she wouldn't regulate. So they moved her to a room far away from the emergency department, and her sugar was regulated. And so again, what do? We go right to you're a
yeah,
liar. This is a character flaw when the reality
yeah,
is it's your brain and body. So I think when we understand those things, first of all, we can forgive ourselves for things that we
mm,
don't like about ourselves.
yeah,
And then we can actually have an action plan to start to really restructure the way that our brain is processing that information.
mm-hmm,
And when you have a stress reaction, one of two things happens. So your amygdala, that security monitor,
mm-hmm,
hits the button. And the
mm-hmm,
second choice he has to make is, can we get out of this or do we need to prepare for the punch?
right,
So if you're driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off and you get the insta sweats, that's your sympathetic nervous system and that's your brain going, you can get out of this. I'm going to send blood to your muscles. You can swerve and you'll be fine. You're going to
mm,
focus. If you are sitting at a stoplight and somebody's going to rear end you, your body goes, prepare for the punch, and it sends out all kinds of opioids and analgesics that we make in our body to relax your body, slow down time. Like, have you ever fallen and you've got like a whole thought process on your way down? Like, it's like everything just slows. So, what happens is that when we have trauma or we have repeated or we repeated stress problems where we're just constantly in a state of fear, we can actually like really hurt ourselves. There's a story of a young woman named Amber. Her mom found her unresponsive on the floor when they got home. They took her to the hospital, couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, the history was her mother's boyfriend had sexually molested her and had gone to prison for it. And then he got out and called the house. She picked the phone up, heard his voice, and her body went overload, overload, overload. And she released so many natural opioids, she OD'd herself. She OD'd herself on her own brain chemicals. And they had to give her Narcan to wake her up. And then they had to give her naloxone to block her opioid receptors in her brain while she had therapy to learn to calm that trigger down. So we really like our bodies have a lot of control over our minds. And so understanding that connection and empowering yourself to be the architect of that, to be the leader of your mind and body. And that's where a lot of the stuff, some people think it's kind of hippie hooey kind of stuff, but like mindfulness and grounding, there's a biology behind that that really, really works. And
Hmm.
that's part of because there's another part of your body called your vagus nerve, your vagal nerve, and it
Yes.
runs down your neck, around your heart, around your stomach.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like our systems manager. It's checking that all the systems are running optimally. Well,
Hmm.
if they aren't, then it sends messages to the thalamus that says, "Hey, we might be in danger. Your heart's pounding really fast, or
Hmm.
and you're hungry, and then now we're going to get grumpy." So if your vagus nerve is out of whack, then you are already elevated in your stress response, and then littler things are going to set you off. So doing some of those grounding types of exercises. So like I worked with somebody who we set up a self-care routine for her, and she had severe anxiety and stress and was just in this rabbit wheel to the point where at one point they thought she had lupus. She was having syncope, which is where you just pass out, kind of like Amber, but not as severe as that. And it was all stress related, which was frustrating because she wanted a diagnosis because it's easier to have that diagnosis and not realize that because it's harder to fix your brain. You've got to be part of it.
Hmm.
So we set up a self-care routine and we did like every 90 minutes, alarm would go off in her phone and she would just do a couple, like 90 seconds of just grounding exercise, take a breath, feel your feet on the ground, stretch your neck a little bit, kind of rub it to massage that vagal nerve. And it was amazing the difference it made in just reducing that baseline so that when something frustrating hit her, she didn't go from 0 to 100. She was able to manage that in a way that her brain was still functioning. Her CEO was still in the office.
Hmm. Hmm. I appreciate you mentioning the fact that she set an alarm.
Yep.
These are small things, and to me, it's like saving money. I won't, like, I can't put $100 in the bank one month and then the next month it's worth 500.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. And so,
Right.
how can we take those small steps where we help to regulate? And it is very much about the discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, I'll be talking to clients about just, how to like bring themselves down a little bit and what kind
Yep.
of exercises like breathing or whatever the case. And the response is, but that's so hard. And it's like, well, yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
it is because you're changing your habits, you're changing your patterns, you're trying to remember.
Right.
But what are the alternatives? If
Right.
if this doesn't change now, when does it change? And if it never changes, what does the rest of your life look like?
Right. And the reality is, taking a breath is not hard. It
Yep.
has to be intentional.
Yes.
What's hard is waking up every day miserable and
Yeah.
going to a work that you don't feel fulfilled doing or having constant
Hmm.
conflict. That's hard.
Yeah.
But learning how to take care of yourself, it's
Hmm.
not hard. It's just you
Yeah.
have to be intentional and you
Yeah.
have to be disciplined to do it every day. And so whatever
Hmm.
it takes to get you into that habit, but
Hmm.
but I'll tell you the rewards are wonderful. I mean,
Hmm.
I find, I mean, I have lots of things going on in my life. It's always a three-ring circus, and I do a really good job managing. Every once in a while, you tip over,
Yep.
but I do a really good job managing my stress because it's just become part of my habit. I breathe, even when I'm just sitting in a chair working, breathing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing better breathing because I've practiced it and it's just become habit at this
Mm-hmm.
point. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, and I think, you know, with leaders, when I work with leaders, I think part of part of being a good leader is first being self-aware for you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
why are you frustrated with the people below you? And, you know, have you been clear about what you expect? Have you provided the right support? Have you addressed the reasons for resistance? You know, change is scary.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to a lot of people lately about just the explosion of AI.
Mm.
People are terrified. Are their jobs going to be obsolete? Are they going to have to learn all these new things that they don't even understand right now? Do they have technology gaps that are even going to get bigger and bigger? And so there's this level of stress within the workplace because the path is unknown. You know, and like I mentioned, my kids are 20 and 23, and they're both nervous about that because they're in the process of trying to carve a path for their life. And they're like, am I even carving one that's going to exist? So there's this level of stress to, you know, back to your point about the contextual factors that impact us. And of course, remember, behavior is biology and context. So we've got this AI thing that's causing everybody to be a little bit nervous about what does this mean for me or what does this mean for my future. The other thing I talk about a lot is when I grew up, and this will date me, but I watched Happy Days and Little House on the Prairie and
Mm-hmm.
shows that were about wholesome and goodness and owning your mistakes and saying you're sorry and working together. And so that those vicarious experiences that I got through media created those folders in my brain. So my worldview is one of like, people are generally kind and want to help out. And, you know, people, when they make mistakes, they can own them kind of thing. Today's media is vote them off the island, let you and I get together and manipulate the situation so we can out them. And you've got the housewives, you've just got just constant othering and manipulation. And then you have the news, which is terrifying to watch, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of when I work with people, sometimes I'm like, you also need to like allow yourself 10 minutes. If anything in the world has blown up and is in dire straits, you'll hear about it in the 10 minutes you're there. And then
Right.
otherwise, it's just the same stuff that just continues to
Mm-hmm.
traumatize us. And even
Mm-hmm.
after 9/11, I remember they had to they kept showing the planes going into the building, and kids were watching and were terrified because they thought it was continuing to happen. They didn't recognize it was one event that we just kept playing over and over again.
Right.
So we have these contextual factors. We have social media, and you know, social media. I was on Facebook, and I got off Facebook. It was fun to like troll people and see like, you know, who, where'd they go, or what are they doing now, or you know, just to see what they look like after.
Yeah.
But after a while, I was like, this is not making me feel good. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Because everybody I ever knew is on a beach, on a vacation somewhere. They have these beautiful kids. My kids are a hot mess. I can't get them to clean their room. We're fighting. They're teenagers. And I was like, I don't even want to, you know, this isn't real. And so we create this kind of persona online that's not real. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
don't take a picture of myself hung over at the grocery store on a Sunday and put it as my profile picture. You
Yeah.
know, it's a carefully curated image. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you meet me in person, I might have my hair all over the place and so I'm not as good as I am in the, you know, virtual world. And then
Yeah.
you look at like the dopamine that we get. So every time somebody likes something, we get a little hit of dopamine. It makes us feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all I have to do is change my profile picture to a ribbon or a flag or whatever it is, and I get 1,000 little jolts of happiness, right? But if I'm in real spaces and you fall down and I help you up and pick your things up and you say thank you, I get one. So the idea of altruism as feeling good, it doesn't feel as good as it once did because I can do something with almost no investment of my time or effort and I can get a huge payoff in my street cred and my popularity. And so that's really damaging and it's damaging the way that our brains work. And then of course you got people doom scrolling and so we really have, you know, to me the key is you've got to be self-aware and intentional about making a decision that you want to be in control and regulated and happy and more reasonable as opposed to ruled by the part of your brain that is
Mm-hmm.
not there to make you happy. It's there to keep you alive.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a drug,
It is a drug.
like an addiction,
Yep.
right?
Well, and they call it dopamine, and even social
Hmm.
media and video games and everything else, casinos is the same thing.
Hmm.
Gambling addicts, it's a dopamine problem because they time it out just perfect to
Yeah.
give your brain those hits, and it feels good. So the question
Yeah.
is, how do you, as the CEO of your brain, say, I want to find positive ways that I can get that dopamine hit?
Hmm.
And then you can plan ahead, to be kind to people or to appreciate things. Like when we feel gratitude or we feel pride or we feel those kinds of things, we get our own dopamine hit. We're like, yay. And so, how do
Yeah.
we create habits, intentional habits that help us to
Hmm.
focus on that as opposed to succumb to the focus of the cesspool in the world?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, you've confirmed for me that I should not stop talking to people in the supermarket
You
or when I'm
shouldn't.
walking. I do it all the time. It's almost like I can't help myself.
Yeah. Take that
I'm,
extra minute to smile and
oh,
what else? Pay a
yeah.
compliment to somebody. Like if you
Yeah.
see somebody and you're like, wow, I really love your pants, or I love
Yeah.
your hairstyle, or that jacket's awesome. And
Yeah.
not fake, but just
Yeah.
taking that moment to say something kind to somebody else and
Hmm.
watching their reaction, you
Yeah.
get a dopamine hit from that too. And it feels
Exactly.
good.
Yeah. And
And
I'm
it
feeling
helps.
it right now, Lisa.
Yeah.
Like
And that's
I've
the
got tingles all over.
Yeah.
It's like,
And
yeah,
that's the
who can I talk to? Yeah.
solution to pollution is dilution. So you can
Oh,
dilute that by
oh,
you being kind, and then you get that back, and then you start to
yeah.
filters that, hey, people are pretty nice
Yeah.
versus side-eyeing them in the store and walking by, and your brain's going, are they dangerous? I don't know. They might be dangerous. Now all of a
Yeah.
sudden you have another filter that says, yep, we've confirmed that bias. People are dangerous,
Yeah.
as opposed to opening yourself up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, regretfully, this has gone way too quickly. And there is so much more. And I have just so very much appreciated not just what you've said, but how you've described it with illustrations, the really sort of true approach as to how everything works either for or against us. The fact that we do have a choice. And I'm just so grateful for what you've shared. And is there anything else that you feel might be, anything you feel that maybe we've missed? And might there be something you could share with the audience that could just really get them to open up their minds to believing, not just thinking, but to believing I can do this. Like
Yeah.
I can do this. And it wasn't until the time probably over 20 years ago, and it was a very bumpy road, where I said to myself, I can do this.
Hmm.
And when I thought of when I was investigating becoming a life coach, nobody knew what it was. My
Right.
husband said, "Why do you want to do that? Do you even know what it was? Do you know what it is?" And I responded with, "Well, I'm not really sure, but I know I get to talk to people." And this was only over the telephone because like this whole internet Zoom technology thing wasn't the thing when I started.
Yeah.
And help them. And that was really all I knew.
Yeah.
And that was a little stressful, but it's like, well, look it. You're going to do it or you're not.
Yep.
You can fail, sure, but my self-talk about failure is that it needs to be embraced because if you're not failing, you're not trying.
Exactly.
And
Right.
so there's that fear that comes up. Well, the last time I failed, my grade 6 friends laughed at me and it's like, oh, so much goes on in there in such a
Right.
short period of time. It's no
Right.
wonder it's so hard to get a grip on it and make sense of it all.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes too, we don't appreciate the comfort of staying the same. I know my warts and my problems, right? So I'm comfortable here.
Right.
And I talk to a lot of people about I can give you a million suggestions. I can
Mm-hmm.
give you a self-care routine. I can
Yeah.
support you. I can talk to you. But
Mm-hmm.
until you decide that the current state of affairs for you
Yeah.
isn't where you want to be, you're
Yeah.
not going to change.
Yeah.
And so, and I think sometimes when people understand that they're missing out on them controlling their lives, they're missing
Mm-hmm.
out on this part, which is the beautiful part of you as
Yeah.
an individual. They're
Yeah.
missing out on that. And when they start to see that and they're like, wait a minute, I'm letting the animal part of my brain
Right.
decide how I feel and what I think. And that's
Hmm.
not what I want to live. I want to live up here. And sometimes it's not the biology that gets people to move, it's more the tell me about your current state of affairs. Like every time we
Hmm.
talk, you're miserable, you're unhappy, you don't know what to do. Do you want to stay here? Because if you do nothing, you will.
Hmm.
If you try, you might, first, I always say the first is the worst, the first time you try something and then you get
Hmm.
better at it.
Hmm.
So but finding that it's almost like, with addiction things, you have to find your bottom. It's like you finally have to get to a point where you're like, I do not like why I'm here and I need to change. And I think what's nice is that when you do talk therapy and stuff, and therapy is wonderful. I mean, I've done therapy in my life and
Hmm.
it can be very useful. But if you don't think forward, if you're only thinking about why you are the way you are, it can leave you feeling powerless. So
Yeah.
it's like instead of, it's good for self-awareness to understand how that past has influenced those filters,
Hmm.
but the next step is what do I do about it?
Yeah.
And how do I then start to retrain my brain? And it's not always repairing a relationship with somebody. It might
Hmm.
be, it's about changing your biology as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. What I've appreciated about some leaders I've had, or even people I've known in my life, they come up with these one-line zingers
Yeah.
that I have remembered that encourage me to um, to demonstrate that behavior or to consciously, intentionally, as you say, think about that thought. And one of them was, and this was decades ago, Lisa, decades ago. If it's to be, it's up to me,
Yeah.
right? Like, as no one can support you in any type of, say, physical therapy, I think about the grueling task of therapy after I slipped and broke my ankle at the dog park. It was an experience I'll never forget. I think our whole community heard me screaming profanities, but it was wicked. There's nothing more brain shattering than looking down and seeing your foot pointing sideways, which is not the direction it should go,
Yeah.
right?
Ugh.
However, after the surgery was successful and all of the above, and you graduate from this cast to a boot cast to crutches, blah, blah, blah. And then there's physio. And
Yep.
without that physio, I do not think I would be as able-bodied as I was. Like
Yeah.
you have to do the little things. It's like, well, what do you mean I have to do this 3 times a day, 10 reps,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. But you do.
Yeah. And
And
physical therapy is a great metaphor because
mm-hmm.
most of the time it's not hard. You
No.
have to be intentional and you have to
Yes.
dedicate. It's the same
Yes.
thing with your brain. If you
Mm-hmm.
want to change and strengthen the way that
Yeah.
your CEO operates with the departments in your brain, it's
Yeah.
got to be intentional and disciplined. One
Mm-hmm.
of my mantras that I always say, I say you get to choose.
Yeah. You
And my
do.
kids hate it when I say that because they'll start and I'm like, you get to choose. You get to choose how you react to the situation. You
Mm-hmm.
get to choose what you decide to do about things. Like you
Mm-hmm.
get to choose. And I think when people are living with the below their nose brain running their world, they feel like they don't have choices. They feel like they're
Mm-hmm.
being controlled by their brain versus
Mm-hmm.
controlling their brain.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's really less work to blame someone else.
Yes. Or to
Or
take a pill or to have a
yeah,
disease. Yes.
right.
And
Yeah.
that's I think that's and the hard part is when you're stressed or you're anxious or you're depressed, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to get that jolt of energy to
Yeah.
start something. And so even
Yeah.
having like a friend or having, there's different ways. Like one of the things I teach a lot about is like how to successfully achieve your goals. Like it's January right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guaranteeing you probably 75% of the people with a New Year's resolution have already forgotten it
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard. It's hard to change a habit and it takes that intention and it takes energy, it takes persistence, and most important, it takes the tenacity to forgive yourself because you will
Yes.
revert to an old pattern. And when
Mm-hmm.
you do, you have a choice. You can either say, well, this wasn't for me anyways. That's not who I am. Or you
Mm-hmm.
can say, okay, that was old. That was the way I used to do things. Or even, say you're trying to lose weight and you end up going out and, splurging on something. To be
Mm-hmm.
able to say that was fun,
Mm-hmm.
but now I'm going to get back to this because
Yeah.
this is who I am. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
this way.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of making this the norm, you're making the future self your norm.
Oh, I like that. The future self is your
Yeah.
norm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 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 Wow. So let's tell our audience where they can reach you.
Sure.
You have so much great information online. Um, the one book I'm aware of is Neuro that you've
Yep.
written,
Yep.
and is that on Amazon?
Yes, that's on
Perfect.
Amazon. I have
Okay.
another book coming out at the end of the month that's
Mm-hmm.
called Aspirations to Operations, and
Oh,
it's really a leadership book that helps
uh-huh.
leaders apply brain science for themselves as a leader and then also for how they can lead transformative change that will
Mm-hmm.
stick. It's sort of the human side of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have my third book in the series will be out later this year, and it's truly a self-help book. So
Mm-hmm.
it is geared toward the individual. You buy it, it's going to be like a workbook you work through to
Mm-hmm.
really dig in and understand yourself. And the leadership book, The Aspirations to Operations,
Mm-hmm.
has a journaling component. So even if you're not a leader of a huge company, you're a leader in your home. You're a leader in,
Yeah.
so you can apply the things that are in that book to any place where you lead at a
Yeah.
church group, in a choir, soccer team, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it has a journaling component that I really encourage people to dig in and really take their
Mm-hmm.
time thinking about because that's that self-discovery and
Mm-hmm.
then strategy for how you can move yourself and others in the right
Mm-hmm.
direction.
Yeah, precisely. And I appreciate what you say about, if even if you're not a leader, say in a business, you can be a leader to someone else. I perceive myself as a leader of one, of a leader of me.
Yeah,
And if I don't do some of these intentional actions to be a better leader of self, which is more emotionally regulated, clear thinking, making better choices of what I choose to allow into my brain, then what kind of role model am I for those I love, for my clients? It's
right,
it's not about do as I ask, not as I do. That's kind of cheating, right?
right,
And
right.
yeah, and not being the truth.
Yeah.
So
Well, and you can't
the
model something you don't do. You have to do it to
precisely.
model it. Yep. Yep.
Precisely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, so your books, and then also I believe it's January the 20th is another podcast you're having. It's 12 p.m. Eastern. And where might our listeners find that?
That is with EP. It's EP Talks is what
Hmm.
it's called.
Okay.
That one's actually more geared towards special education law
Okay.
in
Okay.
schools. So if you've got school
Okay.
leaders listening, they might find that interesting.
Yeah.
I also have on my website, so my website is EP, like Edward Paul,
Hmm. Hmm.
epinstitute.net.
Hmm.
And you can listen to a couple other podcasts I've been on there about leadership and also about
Excellent.
schools. And then lisaregal.com
Hmm.
is my website, and people can reach out to me through LinkedIn. I
Hmm.
do keynotes, I do coaching, I do small
Hmm.
group transformation stuff
Hmm.
in organizations. So pretty much anything where people want to be happier, healthier, and more successful, I can help take that neuro well and shape it into the context that they have so that they can have success.
And after hearing your story today, and thank you for the personal aspects of it as well, is that it's very clear that you've experienced these
Yep.
things.
Been
And
on the
so,
journey.
yeah, and the journey never ends,
Right.
does
It
it?
does.
I mean, yeah, yeah.
Nope.
From birth to death, it is our journey. It defines who we are, in some cases. And if I was to summarize in a very short sentence what I'm feeling about today, it would be live life with intention.
Yeah. Well, and
That's
when
it.
you're self-aware and over my journey of really understanding why my brain operates the way it does and why
Hmm.
my thoughts are the way they are, because some of
Hmm.
them are intentional thoughts that I create, some
Yeah.
of them are thoughts that come to me from
Hmm.
parts of my brain.
Hmm.
I like myself. I like myself better. I
Hmm.
understand myself and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I have some warts, I have some things but
Hmm.
because I understand them,
Hmm.
I can say, hey, I'm sorry, I just act this way. Like, I can be more self-reflective and be
Yeah.
more proactive about how I choose to present myself to the world.
Right. Right.
And it makes you love yourself more then. You
Yeah.
realize that like you're a pretty resilient person and look at
Hmm.
all the things that your brain is doing to protect you. And now
Hmm.
I just needed to strengthen my CEO.
Yeah. Yeah. Powerful beyond our own belief.
Absolutely.
and a lot of self-compassion, self-reflection,
100%.
self-worth. Yeah.
Self-love.
Self-love, big one. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent. Awesome. Is there anything we've forgotten? Any other points of contact or any other books that you may have written? Or I'll be watching
Yeah.
for that one that's coming up.
Yeah, I'll
Uh,
let you know when it comes. It
yeah.
should be out in about 2 weeks. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I just have, the book that's NeuroWell's more for the schools.
Okay.
The aspirations to operations is really for anyone, and
Mm-hmm.
leaders, or as you were saying, you're the leader of yourself. So even some of the pieces of the book could really help you understand yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
then, later on in 2026, I'll have like really kind of a workbook. Like, okay,
Okay.
here's how you do it. So even in your
Yeah.
role as a, life coach, you might even use it as a resource with
Right.
clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Always something to learn
Yeah.
um, about ourselves. And depending on what industry we're in as well, we might have different skills that we need to
Yep.
all learn and capture. So it's nice to have some direction with that. So thank you for your efforts
Yeah.
with all of the materials and for doing what you do and joining me today on blind spots. I'm hoping that it will uncover some of the blind spots that some people in the audience might have. I know it has for me. So
Good. Good.
yeah,
Well, thank you so
excellent.
much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been a real pleasure. Take care.
You too.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.